Motivation is the most socially accepted drug of the modern world. And like any drug, it works perfectly until it stops working. One day you wake up inspired, full of energy, convinced that this time it will be different. You start the project, begin the workout, commit to the change. And then, 3 days later, when the brain's chemical high dissipates, you discover the brutal truth. You didn't build a system. You built a dependency. The Roman Stoics knew something that modern self-help culture has forgotten. Emotions are the least reliable territory on which to build a life. Marcus Aurelius did not wait to feel like governing the most powerful empire in history while battling chronic illness and constant betrayal. Epictetus did not wait for inspiration to teach philosophy after spending years as a slave. They understood the secret that separates those who achieve from those who only dream. Action does not require feeling. Action creates feeling. Schopenhauer dedicated his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, to deconstructing exactly this illusion. He demonstrated that the human will, that blind impulse that moves us, does not wait for ideal conditions, it acts. And it is in this repeated, mechanical, almost robotic action that mastery emerges. Nietzsche was even more direct. In Ecce Homo, he wrote about his years of extreme illness, devastating headaches, total isolation. And how did he produce his most revolutionary works precisely in those moments? Not through inspiration, through discipline so severe that it completely transcended the need to feel motivated. The problem is not that motivation is useless. The problem is that it has become the only tool people know. And when you rely exclusively on motivation to act, you have become its slave. You have handed over control of your life to a temporary and unpredictable emotional state. Throughout this video, you will discover the 10 precise signs that you were a slave to motivation and not a master of action. More importantly, you will learn exactly how the Stoic philosophers Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and Dostoevsky built discipline so deep that motivation became irrelevant. This is not a video about finding your motivation. It is about completely destroying your dependence on it. It is about building an action system so robust that you produce extraordinary results on your best days and especially on your worst. Because in the end, those who win are not the most motivated. They are the ones who act when all motivation has disappeared.
Sign 1. You need inspiration to start. Every time you need to start an important task, you first look for inspiration. You watch motivational videos, you read quotes, you wait for the right moment. You cannot simply start. You need to feel like it first. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who spent years as a slave before earning his freedom, taught a brutal truth in his Enchiridion. Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go well. Dependence on inspiration is a way of outsourcing your agency. You are saying, I can only act when my emotions allow me. This is not freedom. It is emotional slavery. The Stoics understood that the human mind constantly generates diverse emotional states: enthusiasm, apathy, fear, confidence. These states are natural and inevitable. The fatal mistake is believing that you need the right state to act. You don't. You act despite the state, and eventually, action produces the state you were seeking. Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment under conditions that would destroy most writers. He was broke, hounded by creditors, dealing with severe epilepsy, and had just lost his brother. He did not have the luxury of waiting for inspiration. He made a brutal contract with his publisher. He would deliver the complete novel in 9 months, or lose the copyright to all his previous works for 9 years. That would mean absolute financial ruin. So, Dostoevsky did what masters do. He created a system. He dictated to a stenographer, Anna Grigorievna, several hours a day, every day, regardless of how he felt. Many days he was too sick to stand. He dictated lying down. Other days, deep depression consumed him. He dictated anyway. The result? One of the masterpieces of world literature. Not produced by inspiration, produced by mechanical repetition in the face of extreme adversity. You have an important project, but you don't feel like working on it today. So you wait. Tomorrow will be better, or next week, or when circumstances change. Meanwhile, people less talented than you are producing. Not because they are more inspired, but because they stopped waiting for inspiration. The inconvenient truth: if you only act when you feel inspired, you are controlled by random forces, brain chemistry, external events, mood cycles. You are not in charge. Your neurotransmitters are. The arsenal. Exercise. The 2-minute blind action rule. Next time you need to start something important and don't feel like it, set a timer for 2 minutes. Start the task with no negotiation, analysis, or emotional preparation. Commit only to 2 minutes of mechanical action. Notice, 80% of the time, you will continue beyond the 2 minutes. The Stoic trick here? You are not committing to the entire task. You are only eliminating the need for inspiration to start. And starting is 90% of the battle.
Sign 2. Your performance swings dramatically. Some days you are unstoppable, productive, focused, relentless. Other days you can barely function. Your productivity looks like an emotional roller coaster. You have extreme good days and bad days with no middle ground. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was describing the fundamental problem of emotional dependence. You are allowing external factors to dictate your ability to act. When your performance swings dramatically, it reveals that you have not built systems. You build impulses. Systems produce consistent results regardless of emotional variables. Impulses produce brilliant peaks followed by deep valleys. Nietzsche observed this in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Those who depend on elevated states to create inevitably experience proportionally intense low states. Emotional polarity is guaranteed. What is not guaranteed is letting that polarity control your action. Seneca, the wealthiest Stoic in Rome, served as advisor to Emperor Nero, possibly the most unstable and dangerous leader in Roman history. Seneca faced daily chaos, impulsive imperial decisions, constant political threats, instability that would destroy most men. Yet look at his letters and philosophical treatises. Consistent production for decades. No major gaps, no paralysis periods. How? In On Tranquility of Mind, Seneca describes his method. He established non-negotiable daily philosophical practices. Every morning, meditation on Stoic principles. Every night, review of the day. Regardless of what was happening in the imperial palace, these practices happened. He created what we would today call a minimum viable floor, a level of action he would execute regardless of circumstances or emotions. Some days he exceeded this floor significantly, but he never went below it. It was never negotiable. The result, consistency that survived decades of political turbulence until his eventual forced suicide by Nero. Monday, you train for 2 hours, work 8 hours on your project, read a book. You are at the top. Thursday, you barely get out of bed. Zero progress. Friday, you feel guilty and try to compensate with heroic effort. Sunday, you crash again. This pattern is not productivity. It is addiction to emotional intensity. You are confusing dopamine spikes with real progress. Truly productive people do not have spectacular days followed by 0 days. They have consistent average days that accumulate into extraordinary results over time. The arsenal. Exercise. Set your non-negotiable floor. For each important area of your life, define the absolute minimum you will do regardless of how you feel. Work. Even on my worst day, I work 1 hour on the main project. Health. Even exhausted, I do 10 minutes of movement. Creation. Even uninspired, I write 200 words. This is not your goal. It is your floor. Some days you will do 10x this, but you never go below the floor. It is never negotiable. Freedom is not having perfect days, it is eliminating 0 days.
Sign 3. You consume more motivational content than you produce action. In your routine, it includes watching motivational videos, reading self-help books, listening to productivity podcasts. You know all the principles. But when you compare time spent consuming motivation versus time executing, consumption wins by far. Epictetus was brutal about this. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. He despised students who collected knowledge without application. For him, that was not a search for wisdom, it was intellectualized procrastination. Endless consumption of motivational content is a symptom of a deeper problem. You are using motivation as a substitute for action, not as fuel for action. It is intellectual masturbation, the sensation of progress without real progress. Schopenhauer observed in Counsels and Maxims that most people prefer thinking about living to actually living. Excessive planning, endless research, the search for more information, all of this are escape mechanisms disguised as preparation. In his early years, Carl Jung fell into this trap. He studied obsessively psychoanalysis, mythology, alchemy, comparative religions. He accumulated endless knowledge. But at 38, he had a severe psychological breakdown he later called a confrontation with the unconscious. During this crisis period, Jung realized all his theoretical knowledge was useless in the face of his own inner chaos. So he did something radical. He stopped reading, he stopped consuming, and he began experimenting. He started what he called active imagination, a process of direct confrontation with his unconscious through drawing, sculpture, automatic writing. He was no longer studying the psyche, he was exploring his own. This period, when he traded consumption for experimentation, produced the most original concepts of his career: archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation. None of that came from books. It came from direct experimental action. You have a bookshelf full of unread books on entrepreneurship. You follow 47 success mindset accounts on Instagram. You've watched hundreds of hours of content on productivity. And your business? It still hasn't started, or it started and stalled, because you confused learning about doing with doing. Here is the test. If you go a week without consuming any motivational content, do you still act? Or was your action dependent on constant doses of external inspiration? The arsenal. Exercise. 30-day motivation fast. For 30 days, 0 motivational videos, 0 productivity podcasts,
0 self-help books, 0 winner mindset posts. Replace every hour you would spend consuming with an hour executing. At the end of 30 days, compare. Did you produce more or less than usual? If you produced less, your motivation was actually procrastination. If you produced the same or more, you proved you never needed it.
Sign 4. You quit when the initial enthusiasm fades. You start projects with explosive energy. The first weeks are intense, dedicated, productive. Then, inevitably, the excitement fades. And when it fades, you stop. You have a graveyard of abandoned projects, all dead exactly when the initial enthusiasm evaporated. Seneca wrote in On the Firmness of the Wise Man, "Constancy is the mark of the true sage." He was identifying what separates dabblers from masters. Masters keep going when enthusiasm dies. Dabblers don't. Initial enthusiasm is chemical. Your brain releases dopamine when you start something new. It's the evolutionary reward system encouraging exploration. But dopamine is not sustainable fuel. It is the initial spark. If you confuse spark with fuel, you are doomed to abandon everything you start. Nietzsche, in Human, All Too Human, deconstructed the myth of the inspired genius. He showed that what we call genius is actually consistent work over years, but only the initial part, when it was still exciting, is visible. The real part, the decade of tedious work when no one was watching, remains hidden. Gustave Flaubert spent 5 years writing Madame Bovary. 5 years for a single novel. And he hated most of those years. In his letters, Flaubert described the process as torture. He spent weeks on a single paragraph, months on a single scene. He wrote, "Talent is a long patience. It is to look at whatever one wishes to express long enough to discover a new aspect of it." There was no enthusiasm. There was boredom, frustration, constant doubt. But Flaubert had something more valuable than enthusiasm. He had a system. Every day, same time, same place, he wrote. Not when he felt like it, when the clock struck the hour. The result? A masterpiece of world literature. Not produced by constant inspiration, produced by constant action despite the absence of inspiration. January. You start going to the gym with maximum excitement. You train 6 times in the first week. March, you haven't trained in 5 weeks. What happened? Nothing happened. The initial enthusiasm, which you confused with real commitment, naturally evaporated. This pattern repeats with projects, relationships, careers. You are amazing the first 3 months. Then you vanish. The problem is not lack of talent. It is dependence on enthusiasm to sustain commitment, and enthusiasm always diminishes. Always. The arsenal. Exercise. Accept the valley of boredom. For any important project, weeks 1 to 4, expect high enthusiasm. Enjoy it, but don't trust it. Weeks 5 to 12, expect the valley. When enthusiasm dies but results are not yet visible. This is the test. 80% of people quit here. Your only job, keep going during the valley, using only system, never feeling. Write this before you begin. Between weeks 5 to 12, I will want to quit. That does not mean I should quit. It means I am in the valley. Continuing through the valley is the only thing that separates real results from temporary enthusiasm. Sign 5. You wait to feel ready. You postpone important decisions, difficult conversations, necessary actions because you are not ready yet. You wait to have more confidence, more certainty, more preparation.
You believe that eventually you will feel that it is the right time. And while you wait for that feeling, time passes. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Notice, he did not write, "If you don't feel like it, don't do it." He radically separated right action from feelings about action. The Stoics understood something modern psychology is rediscovering. Feeling ready is an effect of action, not a prerequisite for action. You don't act because you feel confident. You act, and then you feel confident. Waiting to feel ready is waiting for your biology to do something it cannot do. Your nervous system does not generate feelings of confidence without evidence of capability. And evidence of capability only comes from previous action. It is a loop, and you only break this loop by acting before you feel ready. When Epictetus was freed from slavery, he had no formal qualifications, no money, no social connections. He was a crippled ex-slave. His master had broken his leg, trying to establish himself as a philosopher in Rome, one of the most elitist societies in history. He did not feel ready to teach. By any objective measure, he was not ready, but he started anyway. He opened a philosophical school. He accepted students. He taught what he knew. And something extraordinary happened. Through the act of teaching, he became a master. His lectures, transcribed by his student Arrian, became the Enchiridion and the Discourses, foundational Stoic texts that have influenced thinkers for 2,000 years. Epictetus never waited to feel worthy of teaching philosophy. He taught philosophy, and through that act, became worthy. You have had a business idea for 3 years, but you are not ready to start. You need more research, more capital, more knowledge, more confidence. Meanwhile, people with worse ideas and less preparation have already started, failed, adjusted, and are 3 years ahead of you. Not because they were more ready, but because they stopped waiting for readiness. The hard truth? You will never feel ready for important things, because important things, by definition, are beyond your current comfort zone. If you felt ready, it wouldn't be growth. It would be repetition. The arsenal. Exercise. Action before readiness. List 3 things you are postponing because you are not ready. That conversation. That project. That risk. For each one, complete, "I will feel ready when blank." Now acknowledge that feeling will never come on its own. It only comes as a result of the very action you are avoiding. Then choose the smallest, scariest action toward each one and execute that action this week. Not when you feel ready, but precisely because you do not feel ready. The feeling of readiness is a fraud. Action creates readiness, not the other way around.
You have identified the first 5 signs. If you recognized 3 or more in yourself, the truth is clear. You are a slave to motivation. Your performance, your action, your life, all controlled by temporary and unpredictable emotional states. But here is where it gets interesting. Up to now, we talked about the symptoms, how to recognize slavery. Now we enter more dangerous territory, the deep mechanisms that keep you trapped, and more importantly, the precise philosophical methods to break those chains. The next 5 signs are not just about emotional dependence. They are about the fundamental lies you tell yourself about how change works, about what constitutes real progress, about the nature of discipline. And each sign comes with the exact method that the Stoic masters, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and others used to completely transcend the need for motivation. to build what they called a will of steel, or invincible character. From here on, there is no middle ground. Either you accept that you will never break free from emotional dependence, or you apply these methods with total brutality. There is no soft version of this transformation. Prepare yourself. The next 5 signs will destroy every excuse you have for not acting.
Sign 6. You confuse planning with progress. You spend more time planning, organizing, optimizing than executing. You have notebooks full of plans, detailed spreadsheets, elaborate systems. But when you look at concrete results, products created, kilometers run, conversations had, the number is embarrassing compared to the time planning. Seneca identified this in On the Shortness of Life. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. He was describing the human tendency to confuse activity with productivity, especially when the activity is mentally stimulating but practically useless. Excessive planning is sophisticated procrastination. It looks productive, it feels productive. Your brain receives the same neural rewards as real progress, but it produces no results in the real world. Nietzsche was even more direct in The Antichrist. Man's maturity, to have regained the seriousness he had as a child at play. Swap die nobly for plan perfectly, same principle. Masters choose imperfect action over perfect planning. Leonardo da Vinci is often celebrated as a genius, but look more closely at his life. He left hundreds of projects unfinished, notebooks full of inventions he never built, paintings he never completed. Why? Because he was addicted to planning and conceptualizing, the intellectually stimulating parts, and resistant to tedious execution. Contrast that with Michelangelo. He was not more talented than Da Vinci, but he finished. The Sistine Chapel took 4 years of brutal work, most of it physically painful, artistically tedious. Michelangelo hated most of the process, but he kept going because he had something Da Vinci did not: commitment to completion over conceptual perfection. The result? Da Vinci is remembered for what he could have been. Michelangelo is remembered for what he did. You spent 3 months researching before starting the project. You are waiting to have all the information before deciding. You are organizing your system before executing. This is not diligence. It is fear disguised as preparation. The brutal reality: 80% of planning is waste. You only discover what actually matters by executing. Planning without feedback from reality is fiction, and you are writing fiction instead of living reality. The arsenal: exercise, execution planning ratio. This week, track rigorously. Hours spent planning, organizing, optimizing, then hours executing, creating, doing, acting in the real world. If your ratio is worse than 1:3, 1 hour planning for 3 hours executing, you are stuck in compulsive planning. New commitment: for every hour of planning, you must execute 3 hours before you are allowed to plan again. This is not a suggestion, it is law.
Sign 7. You need constant novelty. You change methods constantly. A new diet every month. A new productivity system every week. A new project every quarter. You do not fail for lack of innovation. You fail because you never stay with anything long enough to see real results. Epictetus taught, "No great thing is created suddenly. Mastery is the product of tedious repetition over extended time." There is no shortcut, but the search for novelty is precisely the search for a shortcut, the hope that the next method will be easier, faster, more exciting. Schopenhauer, in The Art of Being Happy, wrote about what he called endless desire. Humans are biologically programmed to seek novelty. It was an evolutionary advantage when resources were scarce. But in the modern world,
that same wiring has become a curse. You seek novelty when you should seek depth. The truth no one wants to hear: methods matter far less than you think. Consistency matters far more than you imagine. Any mediocre method applied for 5 years beats the perfect method abandoned after 3 months. Bruce Lee trained the same punch thousands of times. Not thousands of different punches, the same punch, repeated until it became a reflex, until his body executed it perfectly without conscious involvement. He famously said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." This applies to everything. The writer who uses the same system for 10 years beats the writer who changes systems every month. The entrepreneur who refines the same business model for a decade beats the entrepreneur who chases a new opportunity every quarter. Depth beats breadth, always. But depth is tedious, so you flee to novelty. You've been on Method X for 6 weeks. You still don't see dramatic results. You discover Method Y. It looks better, more exciting, more promising. You switch. 3 months later, you are on Z. Always searching, never finding. Why? Because 6 weeks is not enough to evaluate any method. Real results require at least 6 months, often years. But you never stay long enough to find out. You are addicted to the excitement of starting something new, not to the result of finishing something old. The arsenal. Exercise. Minimum time commitment contract. Choose one method for each important area of your life. Then sign a contract with yourself. I commit to using Method X for minimum 6 months, regardless of newer, more exciting methods appearing, progress seeming slow, doubts arising, boredom consuming me. I can only evaluate effectiveness after this period, not before. Put this where you see it daily, because when the excitement for novelty appears, and it will, you will need a reminder that depth, not novelty, creates mastery.
Sign 8. Your environment dictates your behavior. You act differently depending on where you are. At home, you collapse. At the office, you produce. With certain people, you're disciplined. With others, you are chaotic. Your behavior does not come from internal principles. It comes from external stimuli. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire while constantly traveling. Battlefields, distant provinces, miserable conditions. He did not have the luxury of a perfect environment. So he developed what he called the inner citadel, a mental fortress that functioned independently of external circumstances. He wrote, "Men seek retreats for themselves, in the country, by the sea, in the mountains. And you too are wont to desire such things greatly. But this is altogether a mark of the most common sort of men, for it is in your power whenever you shall choose to retire into yourself." Dependence on environment is another form of slavery. You have handed control of your action to external factors. You are only disciplined when the environment allows it. This is not discipline, it is obedience to circumstances. Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz, literally the worst environment a human being can experience. Extreme hunger, forced labor, death all around, total loss of external autonomy. And yet Frankl found, more than that, created inner freedom. He developed the method he later called logotherapy precisely in that environment. He discovered that even when everything external is controlled, there is one freedom no one can take: the freedom to choose your attitude. He wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." If Frankl could maintain agency in Auschwitz, you can maintain it in your comfortable home. You say, "I can't focus at home."
while having a private room with a door. Frankl was in a concentration camp, surrounded by death, and still chose his mental response. You say, I need the right environment to produce, while Dostoevsky wrote masterpieces in a Siberian prison. You say, people around me distract me, while Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while traveling with an army on campaign. Your environment is not the problem, your dependence on it is. The arsenal. Exercise. Hostile environment test. Choose your most important activity, then intentionally perform it in progressively difficult environments. Week 1, ideal environment. Week 2, average environment, public cafe, library. Week 3, difficult environment, travel, friend's house, noisy place. Week 4, hostile environment, the worst you can find that is still safe. Goal: to prove to yourself that your capacity for action does not depend on environment. When you can execute in the worst environment, you have proven total independence. Sign 9. You value intensity over consistency. You prefer working 16 hours once a month to 2 hours a day. You like occasional heroic effort more than boring daily routine. You seek the epic, the dramatic, the intense, and disdain the small, the repetitive, the consistent. Seneca wrote in Letters to Lucilius, "It is quality rather than quantity that matters." But he was not defending sporadic intensity. He was defending consistent quality, small daily doses of excellence over decades. Addiction to intensity is ego disguised as productivity. Intensity looks impressive. Intensity generates stories. I worked 20 hours straight sounds heroic. I worked 2 hours a day for 400 days sounds boring. But which produced more? Always consistency. The math doesn't lie. 2 hours a day for 400 days equals 800 hours. One 20-hour day equals 20 hours. Accumulated average consistency crushes sporadic intensity every time. Jerry Seinfeld, when asked about his method for writing comedy, revealed something deceptively simple. Don't break the chain. He had a big calendar on the wall. Every day, he wrote jokes. It didn't matter how many. It didn't matter if they were good. He put a big red X on that day. After a few days, he had a chain of X's. His only job, don't break the chain. There were no heroic 12-hour days, no special inspiration, just writing every day, an unbreakable chain. The result? One of the most prolific and successful careers in comedy. Compare that with comedians who wait for inspiration, who have sporadic, intense writing sessions. Most disappear. Why? Because intensity is not sustainable. Consistency is. You train intensely for a week after months of inactivity. You get injured and stop again. You work in a frenetic burst for 3 days, then crash for 2 weeks. You are confusing intensity with commitment. But real commitment is not dramatic. It is tedious. It is doing the same average thing every day when no one is watching and nothing exciting is happening. People who win are not the most intense. They are the most consistent. And consistency will never be exciting. That is precisely the point. The arsenal. Exercise, the minimum chain. Choose one crucial action. Then establish the minimum viable version of that action you can do every single day without fail. Not train 2 hours when motivated, but do 20 push-ups every day, no exceptions. Not write when inspired, but write 200 words every day, no exceptions. Lower the bar until it is impossible not to do it. Then build an unbreakable chain. Commit to 100 days without breaking it. No occasional heroism. Guaranteed daily mediocrity. After 100 days, you will have more progress than 90% of people trying sporadic intensity.
Sign 10. You still believe motivation will come back. Every time motivation disappears, you patiently wait for its return. I just need to rest. I just need a break. Motivation will come back. And sometimes it does, temporarily. Then you act again, temporarily. And the cycle continues endlessly, never breaking. This is the final and most devastating sign, because it reveals that you still have not understood the fundamental truth. Motivation is not the fuel. Motivation is the obstacle. Nietzsche wrote in Will to Power, quote, "What defines man? He wants to reach an end." Unquote. Note, not he feels like reaching it. He wants, in the sense of willpower, determination, conscious choice that completely transcends feeling. As long as you wait for motivation to return, you are waiting for your emotions to solve a problem that only action solves. This never works. Because emotions are not the cause of action. They are a reaction to action. The truth that destroys everything: you will never stop depending on motivation until you accept that motivation will never be reliable. It will always oscillate. It will always disappear. It will always disappoint you. And the faster you accept this and build a system that works without it, the faster you free yourself. Immanuel Kant is famous for his extremely rigid routine. He woke up exactly at 5 a.m., worked until 7, had breakfast until 9, lectured until 1 p.m., ate lunch and socialized until 3:30 p.m., walked until 5, studied until 10, slept. Every day, for decades. His neighbors set their clocks by Kant's daily walk. He never waited for motivation. He did not even think about it. The system ran automatically. And the result? Critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, critique of judgment, 3 of the most influential works in Western philosophy, not produced by inspiration, produced by a mechanical system executed independently of emotional state. Kant proved when you remove emotion from the equation completely, what remains is consistent production over decades. You are reading this script, hoping, even unconsciously, that it will give you motivation to change. But if I have done my job correctly, you are beginning to realize the search for motivation is precisely what keeps you stuck. You don't need more motivation. You need less dependence on it. You need to build a life where action happens automatically, mechanically, regardless of how you feel on any given day. Does that sound cold? Robotic? Good, because the alternative, swinging forever between motivational peaks and valleys of inaction, is prison disguised as humanity. The arsenal. Final exercise, the automatic action protocol. Choose the 3 to 5 most important behaviors in your life. For each one, create an automatic trigger action that does not require decision or feeling. Not, I will train when I feel like it, but 7 a.m. equals training clothes on, 0 deliberation. Not, I will work on the project when I'm inspired, but right after coffee equals open the file, 0 choice. Implement these triggers for 90 days. Goal: to make action as automatic as brushing your teeth. You do not decide whether you will brush your teeth. You do not wait for motivation to brush your teeth. You simply do it because that is what happens at that time. Turn critical behaviors into non-negotiable automatisms. When you achieve this, motivation becomes irrelevant, and the irrelevance of motivation is absolute freedom.
You've reached the end. 10 signs. 10 mirrors showing truths you would probably rather not see. If you recognized 7 or more in yourself, the reality is undeniable. You are a slave to motivation. Your life is controlled by temporary emotional states, your performance determined by forces you do not control. But here's what the Stoic philosophers, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Dostoevsky, all those who produce extraordinary work under miserable conditions knew. The death of dependence on motivation is not a loss, it is liberation. When you no longer need to feel motivated to act, you gain something infinitely more valuable: real autonomy. You are no longer a slave to random brain chemistry, external circumstances, mood fluctuations. You act because you decided to act, period. Seneca wrote in his last letters before being forced to commit suicide by Nero, "Life is not short. We make it so by wasting it." He was describing precisely this. People spend decades waiting for the right moment, the right feeling, the right motivation. And while they wait, life slips away. The final test that separates those who change from those who only talk about change. In the next 24 hours, will you take one of the exercises from the script and execute it? Not when you feel like it, not when the timing is perfect, but in the next 24 hours, regardless of how you feel. If the answer is no, you have proven the central point of this video. You are waiting for motivation to implement methods that eliminate the need for motivation. It is the perfect paradox, and it is exactly why you remain stuck. If the answer is yes, you have just taken the first step toward real freedom. Not the freedom to do what you feel like, that is just slavery to impulses, but the freedom to do what you choose to do, regardless of what you feel. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire while sick, betrayed, exhausted, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not external events. Realize this and you will find strength." Strength does not come from feeling strong. Strength comes from acting when you feel weak. Discipline does not come from feeling motivated. Discipline comes from acting when all motivation is dead. And here is the final truth no one tells you. When you finally build a life where action does not depend on emotion, something unexpected happens. Motivation starts to appear, not as a requirement for action, but as a byproduct of action. You act, then you feel motivated, not the other way around. But at that point, motivation is irrelevant. You already have momentum. You already have results. You have already proven to yourself that you do not need it. So when it appears, it is a pleasant bonus, not a desperate necessity. The Stoics called this ataraxia, tranquility of mind that comes from knowing you are not controlled by external forces or internal states. You act, you produce, you build, and nothing, not pain, not fear, not absence of inspiration, can stop you, because you killed the inner slave who needed emotional permission to live. And in his place, the master was born, who lives because he chooses to live. Not when it's easy, not when he's inspired, but because that is what masters do. Now go, choose one exercise, execute it in the next 24 hours. No negotiation, no justification, no waiting for motivation that will never reliably come. Or remain a slave. The choice, the only thing that has always been free, is yours.